This morning presents one of those preaching challenges that happens every once in a while, where you have something in the church calendar and you have something in the secular calendar that kind of coincide, and you've got to find a way to bring them together. This is Christ the King Sunday, where we recognize the kingship of Christ, the reign of Christ over all of creation, the coming of Christ in fullness of his reign. But it's also, of course, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So we'll see where this goes. If I falter, Milton's here, he can pick it up. Right? Oh, well, I tell you, that reminds me of a retired Methodist preacher that was living in Vaughn, New Mexico back in the old days. It wasn't that long ago, but it was when Vaughn was a much smaller town. Okay, it wasn't long ago. Anyway, he ran a little business, a little shop, and people would come in there and they'd play checkers and they'd spin tails, but this old preacher was known for backing up everything that he did with Scripture. Well, one day this big pickup, brand new, came in, skidded into the parking lot there. This guy was pulling a horse trailer with a real fancy rig, you know. And he walked into the store and he said, "I just bought a prize racing horse and I need a blanket for it." And so the old preacher said, "Well, I think I've got something here." And he pulled down some things that were off the shelf. And he had one that was really nice, multicolored. I mean, it was a very nice blanket. He said, "That'll cost you $100. I said, I think I need something better than that." And well, he showed him this other one, had nice embroidery and so forth. It cost $250. The man said, "No, I think I want something even better than that." He said, "Well, I tell you what, I've got something in the back. I think it'll fit your bill just right." So he went back to the back and he climbed up on the top shelf and he pulled down this old pale blue blanket and shook the dust out of it. He came back in and he showed it to the customer and he said, "This is the finest blanket. I've been hiding it in the back. This will cost you $500. And said, "That's what I need." Paid him $500, got in his horse trailer and left. All the people playing checkers said, "Now, preacher, how do you justify that?" "Well, he was a stranger and I took him in." Sorry, that just came to me when I was nothing against you. No. Attitude of gratitude. On an ordinary winter day in 1961, an MIT meteorologist named Edward Lorenz ran some routine experiments and found some unusual results. Lorenz discovered that seemingly tiny and insignificant changes in his data could produce huge differences in the final results. At first, Lorenz and other scientists in the field of chaos theory called this the sensitive dependence on initial data. Fortunately, later on, Lorenz used a simpler term, the butterfly effect. In 1972, Lorenz presented a scientific paper entitled "Predictability: Does the Flap of a Butterfly's Wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas?" According to Lorenz's theory, the butterfly's wing flapping doesn't actually cause a tornado, but it can start a chain reaction leading to giant changes in worldwide weather patterns. In other words, even tiny, insignificant movements or actions can produce huge changes that affect millions of people. The Bible often describes a similar butterfly effect for the spiritual life. According to Jesus, the spiritual butterfly effect occurs when we do the small things. Making a meal, visiting the sick, befriending the lonely, opening our home to a guest, praying with a friend for insignificant people, which makes a huge difference in God's eyes. But according to Jesus, there's also a reverse butterfly effect. Consistently failing to display small acts of kindness, for example, living an unkind lifestyle, has a profound loss of opportunity in the spiritual realm. We need to have an attitude of gratitude. Now, that means an attitude of thanks. Daniel Meyer tells the story of an elderly woman who heard a sermon in which she felt God was encouraging her to look for ways in which she could use her particular gifts and situation to minister to the needs of others. She thought about her gifts and realized that she'd been told by others that she had the gift of hospitality. She lived alone in a small apartment near a large university, and she had afternoons free. She pondered the needs of those who were nearby and the people who tugged at her heartstrings. To her mind came the students nearby who were so far away from home. It was then that an idea both strange and simple suddenly arose. She got a stack of 3x5 cards and wrote on each one the following words: "Are you homesick? Come to my house at 4 p.m. for tea." She included a phone number and an address and then posted the cards all over campus. After a slow start, homesick students began trickling into her house each week for tea. When she died 10 years later, 80 honorary pallbearers attended her funeral. Each one of them was a student who once upon a time found a hot cup of tea, a sense of home, and the gospel of Jesus in the hospitable heart of this faithful servant. An attitude of thanks. The contrasting attitude, Jesus says, is an attitude of selfishness. One video version of the NPR radio show, This American Life, captured the story of a prize-winning photojournalist. At one point, he soberly confessed that many photojournalists remain spectators as they observe and record the misfortunes of others. Then he told the interviewer about a disturbing story, about an incident in which he was continuing to snap pictures as a woman eventually drowned. He says, "I was sent out on an assignment when I was working for the Lawrence Eagle Tribune. They wanted pictures of a coastal storm, so I went out to nearby Plum Island. I walked on the beach, and there was this one figure standing by the ocean looking out. The video then scans to a photo that shows a lone woman standing on the shore's edge with waves crashing in front of her." He continues, "She was drinking a beer. A split second after this picture was taken, a wave came in, hit the embankment below her feet, knocked the sand out, and she went sliding into the water." The video scans to a second photo that shows the woman lying in the shallow water after the wave had retreated. Then he says, "I was probably at least 50 feet away from her, shooting with a telephoto lens. She was in the water, either in shock or drunk or whatever. I thought about, okay, I'm going to make a rescue. I already got the shot I need." The video turns to a third photo that shows two men approaching the woman who has her hand outstretched. "I turned around, and within 100 feet of me there was a lifeguard. So I continued to photograph the sequence. There was someone who was with the lifeguard who got there first. He rushed to her. He was ready to reach out and grab her and pull her to safety. But at the last second, something stopped him." The next photo pictures the two men backing off as a large wave prepares to crash on top of the helpless woman. Photojournalist finishes the story. The wave looked to me like it was 20 feet high. Within seconds after this photograph was taken, she was covered by the wave. I realized that she was gone. The sequence of pictures received quite a bit of attention, and a lot of criticism came into the Lawrence Eagle Tribune about their photographer, who had watched someone drown in the ocean while he just continued to take pictures. Later in the interview, he admits that he could have made a difference, but that instead he chose to observe and take pictures. He now only takes easy and fun pictures because they are less of a burden. How often do we simply watch? How often do we simply stand back and let someone else do the work we might feel called to at that moment? There's an attitude of thanks that we can have. There's an attitude of selfishness that we can have. These attitudes make great difference. We should be honoring the greatest in the least. During an extended visit with Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity, Dr. Mary Poplin discovered the depths of sin in her own heart. It happened while Dr. Poplin was trying to care for a 5-month-old infant who was deformed, constantly sick, and often miserable. Dr. Poplin always found ways to avoid feeding this child, but one day it was unavoidable. She writes, "When feeding time was over, the babies were falling asleep in their bassinets, and I was getting ready to go. I glanced at the infants on my way out the door and noticed that undigested formula was dripping out of this child's bassinet. He had thrown up what must have been the entire 8-ounce bottle. Looking around for someone to tell as I left the room, I saw no one in the infant area, and the few adults in the room had their hands full with the other children. So I decided, with no little struggle, to stay and clean up the mess. I put on my apron again. I lifted the baby out of his bassinet and helped him on my shoulder as I began to gather the dirty sheets together and use them to wipe up the mess. As I was cleaning, I heard a muffled sound from the infant in my arms. Tears were pouring out of his eyes, and the only sound he could make was a convulsive sob. When I looked at him, I saw in myself what Jeremiah called the desperate wickedness of the heart. I realized that I had approached this task with a spirit of resistance and impatience. I had thought very little, if at all, about this child and his needs other than to be clean. As I threw the sheets into the laundry pile, I began to bathe his little misshapen body and change his clothes. Afterward, I held him to me tightly as I looked at him, rocked him, and prayed. In a short time, he was asleep. I must tell you that the moment I saw him weeping and realized the wretchedness in my heart, I knew it was sin. There was no doubt in my mind that this was what Christ said when he said, out of the heart come evil thoughts. I asked Christ to forgive and to change me. In those moments, as I rocked the baby, I could feel Christ work inside my spirit, just as surely as if he were sitting next to me. Finding that we can honor the greatest, honor Christ, as we honor the least, those that are in the most need, those who are least able to care for themselves. That is the opportunity that we have to show true gratitude to the one who is King of all. Robbie Robbins was an Air Force pilot during the First Iraq War. After his 300th mission, he was surprised to be given permission to immediately pull his crew together and fly his plane home. They flew across the ocean to Massachusetts, and they had a long drive to western Pennsylvania. They drove all night, and when his buddies dropped him off at his driveway just after sunup, there was a big banner across the garage. "Welcome home, Dad." How did they know? No one had called, and the crew themselves hadn't expected to leave so quickly. Robbins relates, "When I walked into the house, the kids, about half dressed for school, screamed, 'Daddy!' Susan came running down the hall. She looked terrific, hair fixed, makeup on, and a crisp yellow dress. 'How did you know?' I asked. 'I didn't,' she answered through tears of joy. 'Once we knew the war was over, we knew you'd be home one of these days. We knew you'd try to surprise us. And so we were ready every day.'" Today is a special Sunday. It's a Sunday that combines two events: Christ the King Sunday, where we recognize Jesus as the King of the universe, and Thanksgiving is coming, and so we recognize that we should be grateful, but today is a day when we should remember that we should always be mindful of those two things. We should always be ready. We should always be ready to be thankful. We should always be ready to give up our attitude of selfishness so that we can honor the greatest by honoring the least. This week you'll have opportunity to enjoy a feast. You'll have opportunity perhaps to enjoy some good football. I'm hoping for that. We'll see. But throughout the year, you will have opportunity to encounter people who are in great need. Don't pass them by. Recognize Jesus in that person and offer to that person, as you would offer to Jesus, all that you can.